one more. Oh, any message you want to say? Good luck or something? I love. Thank you. One more. Is it okay to sign it in the cover?
Message?
No, just sign. Alright, that's it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Say hi to your friend.
Yes. Maybe a shout out. So there are two friends I have. Say hi to the video game developer name is Sebastian.
Sebastian.
So maybe you want to say something to Sebastian?
Hi, Sebastian.
Huh?
Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting us.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. The Sega Mega Drive, or the Sega Genesis known in America, was the very first gaming console that I owned. I started playing video games on the Sega Mega Drive somewhere around 1996. There were 3 games of that system that I vividly remember playing the most: Sonic the Hedgehog, Tiny Toon Adventures, Buster's Hidden Treasure, and Streets of Rage. Through memory alone, I consider one of these 3 as the very first video game that I have ever played. As the title suggests, I will be talking about Streets of Rage for this video. I have been a fan of this series for my entire life at this point. I consider the first Streets of Rage game as the point zero of my life as a gamer. This is the game that got me into the world of gaming. In fact, the entire series is also the point zero of this YouTube channel. I started this channel because of Streets of Rage 4, and my first major commentary video is about Streets of Rage Remake. It is the inception for yours truly. Streets of Rage, or Bare Knuckle in Japan, is a series of side-scrolling beat-em-up games published by Sega. The game revolves around a group of ex-police vigilante fighters cleaning up crime on a fictional Detroit-like city called Wood Oak City. These fighters have to fight their way to take down a crime syndicate that has taken control of the city. There are 4 main entries of Streets of Rage. The first 3 games were developed by Sega AM7 for the Sega Mega Drive, released from 1991 to 1994. The 4th game was developed by 3 developers, Dotemu, Lizard Cube, and Guard Crush Games, for various platforms, released in 2020, 26 years after the 3rd game. As of today, the series has sold around 10 million copies worldwide. In this video, I'm going to discuss the game that started it all. We are going to take a deep dive on the first Streets of Rage game. The reason I wanted to do this video is because the lead composer of the series, Koshiro Yuzo, is coming to Indonesia Game Expo this October. So, it's only fitting that this month's theme for the channel is Streets of Rage. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a 33-year retrospective of Streets of Rage. Oba Noriyoshi is a Japanese video game designer, director, and producer who worked for Sega from 1987 to 2003. An interesting fact about Oba is that he graduated from a marketing and statistics major from Waseda University, which means that he had no background of programming or any other computer science in that regard. He always wanted to have a career in manufacturing. However, the only Japanese manufacturing industries at the time who would hire graduates from non-science degrees were toys, stationery, and video games. Sega was the first company to hire him, and he was assigned as a game planner despite not having any significant knowledge at the time. According to an interview by Keith Stewart from The Guardian, despite not having any knowledge of video game design, Oba used his understanding of board games when designing video games. The first major title that he worked in Sega was Wonder Boy in Masterland for the Sega Master System. He was able to learn a lot more about programming and video game design through this project. His next project would be his breakthrough game. The year was 1989. The Sega Mega Drive was the newly released console. Oba was tasked to create a launch title that can showcase the ability of the 16-bit home console. That game was The Revenge of Shinobi, a sequel to the Sega arcade classic, Shinobi. According to Keith Stewart's interview, Oba was in charge of a team of 8 people. He was the lead director and planner for the project. On his team, there were 3 full-time programmers, 4 full-time designers, and 1 sound programmer. The Revenge of Shinobi would later receive critical acclaim and showcase what the 16-bit Sega Mega Drive system was able to do at the time. Oba and his team managed to give a good impression in regards to the console. This success led to Sega giving him more important roles for future projects to come. I mentioned there was 1 sound programmer in Oba's team. You guys can already guess it by now. That sound programmer was none other than Koshiro Yuzo. Koshiro Yuzo is a Japanese music composer and sound programmer, often regarded as one of the most influential composers in the video game industry. He is best known for his work with electronic music such as chiptune, especially in the early 90s. Since a very early age, Koshiro has a talent for music. His mother, Koshiro Tomo, was a pianist and taught him how to play the piano since he was 3 years old. He even started taking music lessons at the age of 8 with an industry legend in Japan, Hisaishi Joe, who is famous for the music in Miyazaki anime films. After lessons with Hisaishi, everything that Koshiro has learned were self-taught. Prior to working with Sega, Koshiro was a music composer at Nihon Falcom in 1986 at the age of 18. Some of his early composing works were the first 2 Ys games for the PC 8801 series. Due to his contribution, the scores in Ys series are regarded as some of the most influential RPG scores. After working for Nihon Falcom for 2 years, Koshiro decided to work as a freelancer. This is when Sega decided to bring him in for a project. His first freelance work was indeed The Revenge of Shinobi for the Sega Mega Drive. His music style for the game was progressive techno mixed with traditional Japanese music. His work for the game was considered way ahead of its time. Oba Noriyoshi and Koshiro Yuzo. Following the success of The Revenge of Shinobi, these two would work together once again to capitalize the growing popularity of the beat-em-up genre. They became the 2 pioneers of the series that would end up being considered as one of the best in the genre. The early 90s was a golden age for the beat-em-up genre. One of the companies that revolutionized the genre is Capcom with the release of Final Fight in 1989. It became a critical and financial success as the game was the second highest grossing arcade game in 1991, just below Street Fighter II. Capcom released a home version of Final Fight exclusively for the Super Nintendo. The home version became a commercial success as it sold 1.5 million copies worldwide, becoming one of Capcom's best-selling games for the Super Nintendo. Years prior to the home version of Final Fight, Sega actually had their own beat-em-up game for the Sega Mega Drive called Golden Axe. However, someone at Sega believed that it was best for the company to capitalize the success of a street fighting themed game such as Final Fight and Street Fighter II. That someone at Sega was indeed Oba Noriyoshi. Oba Noriyoshi was a fan of American TV shows such as Starsky and Hutch and The A-Team, to name a few. He wanted to have a brawler game with a heavy American street setting that resembles his favorite TV shows. He also wanted to have players to play as police characters in the game. Originally, the working title for this brawler game is called D-SWAT. It was meant to be a spin-off for E-SWAT City Under Siege, an earlier Sega Mega Drive game released in 1990. So this game would have had a futuristic Detroit-like setting a la RoboCop if this idea would have gone through. This idea, however, was scrapped, and according to some sources, Oba didn't want the game to have too futuristic of a setting. With the success of his prior game, The Revenge of Shinobi, Oba brought in Koshiro Yuzo once more to work as the music composer and sound programmer. Considering the music and sound for The Revenge of Shinobi were heavily praised by critics, It was only the right move to include Koshiro in this project as well. After careful consideration and planning, Oba and his team finally decided the name for the Sega's version of Final Fight game. The game was named Bare Knuckle Ikari no Tekken, which translates to Bare Knuckle Furious Iron Fist. To make it short, the title is simply called Bare Knuckle. The game, however, had a different name in the West, which is the name that we are all familiar with, Streets of Rage. I couldn't find a reason why Sega decided to change the name for its Western release though. The closest explanation I found was on the r/retro gaming subreddit. According to this post, there are two possible reasons why Sega decided to change the name from Bare Knuckle to Streets of Rage. The first possible reason is that the name Bare Knuckle might have been copyrighted by something else in that region. It was a similar reason why games like Dragon Quest was localized as Dragon Warrior and Star Fox was localized as Star Wing. The second possible reason is that the marketing department at Sega thought it would be more attractive to market the game as Streets of Rage. Perhaps the localized name sounded way cooler than the original Japanese one, and to be honest, I kind of agree. Streets of Rage just sounds more impactful to me than Bare Knuckle. Hence, I always refer the game as the former rather than the later. I mentioned that Streets of Rage was originally meant to be the spin-off of eSWAT City Under Siege. Oba actually had the lead programmer of eSWAT to work on this game. The programmer's name is Momota Hiroshi. Prior to Streets of Rage, Momota has worked on past Sega beat-em-up games such as Altered Beast and the Fist of the North Star game, Last Battle. Now, with all the important history lessons covered, let's take a look at the in-game aspect of Streets of Rage itself. The story of Streets of Rage is the typical old-school Detroit cop flick. To make things easier to understand, how about I read the opening crawl for you? This city was once a happy, peaceful place, until one day, a powerful secret criminal organization took over. This vicious syndicate soon had control of the government and even the police force. The city has become a center of violence and crime where no one is safe. Amid this turmoil, a group of determined young police officers has sworn to clean up the city. Among them are Adam Hunter, Axel Stone, and Blaze Fielding. They are willing to risk anything, even their lives, on the Streets of Rage. Let's talk about characters. You have 3 playable characters to choose. The first character, and my favorite character in the series, Adam Hunter. He is the strongest in terms of power, but is the slowest out of all the 3 characters. Adam also has the longest range of attacks, as he can reach enemies further than other characters. His fighting style is primarily kickboxing. An early concept of Adam shows that he was originally meant to be called Blackbird. He's a black kickboxer whose hometown is in London. The second character is the face of the series itself, Axel Stone. In terms of appearance, he has a lot of similarities with Cody from Final Fight. In terms of stats, Axel is an all-rounder as he is fairly decent in terms of power, speed, and range. His fighting style is a mix of multiple martial arts such as boxing, karate, and kickboxing. Axel's early concept design had a nickname of God Hand. From this image, we can see that he somewhat resembles Chuck Norris. He's a Caucasian male with a black mullet and a black beard and fights using karate style. The third character, and the only female playable character in the game, Blaze Fielding. What she lacks in power, she makes up for it in speed. Blaze's agility also allows her to jump higher than the rest of her teammates. Her fighting style is judo, which also means that she has the strongest throws in the game. Blaze's early concept design is a very interesting one. Her nickname is Pink Typhoon, and she is a kung fu fighter from Hong Kong. Her design is very similar to Chun-Li from Street Fighter. In fact, too similar in that regard. Here's an interesting fact about the 3 playable characters. Originally, Adam and Axel were called Wolf and Hawk. You can see from this screenshot taken from Mega Drive Fan, a Japanese video game magazine issued on 15th June 1991. Honestly, this was a change that I'm glad it happened. I don't really vibe with the names Wolf and Hawk, honestly. I somewhat find it interesting as well that unlike other Street Brawler games at the time, the story doesn't revolve around rescuing a girl. When you look at other similar games such as Taito's Double Dragon, Konami's Vendetta, and even Capcom's Final Fight, all of them revolves around rescuing a girl. It's a minor observation, but an interesting one still. With the story being a rather simple one to explain, let's take a look at the gameplay aspect of Streets of Rage. According to the Oba Noriyoshi interview by Keith Stewart, the combat system of Streets of Rage was built towards a more strategic gameplay. Oba has stated that enemies were designed to surround the player, and the player must avoid surrounding enemies in order to attack enemies at the right time. To understand more about this concept, I'm going to quote Oba Noriyoshi from the interview when asked about the gameplay elements. What I cared about most was the combat system, its strategic elements, and how it felt to play. The basic concept of the enemies is very simple. They move around in order to surround the player, so the key is for the player to move in such a way to avoid this. We developed a series of moves to enable strategic play. Jumping while holding allowed a player to vault over enemies to escape an encirclement. Throwing enabled the player to throw the enemy to either the front or the rear. The thrown enemy also had collision detection, so you could use this tactically to avoid becoming surrounded. Attack from the back is a reverse attack that offers the player an option if quickly approached from behind. This varied combat system provided players with choice and, as such, a feeling of achievement. The basic premise of Streets of Rage is like most beat-em-up games. You pick a character, you walk through a stage, you beat up enemies along the way, you fight the boss, you complete the stage, and you proceed to the next stage to do it all over again. There are 3 button commands: A for the special move, B for attack, and C for jump. Let's go over the controls one by one. The B button is not only for attacks, but also for other actions that your character can do. You can pick up weapons with the B button, thus enabling you to smack enemies with higher damage. You can use the B button to throw enemies when you get close and grab them. You can also use the B button to break free from an enemy's grab. As Oba stated, players can perform a back attack. To perform a back attack, you press both the B button and the C button together. One major mechanic that I really like from Streets of Rage is landing recovery. Enemies can perform throws at you, and you recover from the fall by pressing up and the C button together. This mechanic was added as an addition to a more strategic gameplay that Oba envisioned. Do you see that big S sign next to your character's health bar? That is the number of special attacks you can do in a stage. Pressing the A button allows you to summon a police car, and a police officer will open fire that kills the entire enemies on screen. This is a limited attack, thus you need to be very wise when calling a police backup. Different player has different police attack. For player 1, the police attack is a giant rocket that creates a flaming circle on impact. For player 2, the police attack is a barrage of rapid bullets that rain down upon enemies in the field. A little fun fact about the police car, it was actually taken straight from eSWAT City Under Siege. It's no surprise honestly, considering the game was intended to be a spin-off of eSWAT, and the lead programmer also worked on eSWAT. The combat system for its time was unique compared to other games of the genre. However, coming back to this game was a little bit rough around the edges for me. The gameplay was very limited, especially compared to the games that came after Streets of Rage. It was in fact the first game, and they were really experimental to try distinguish themselves to other games of the same genre. Streets of Rage does something that Nintendo don't in Final Fight. See what I did there? Streets of Rage allows 2-player co-op mode. In fact, Streets of Rage was built for a more cooperative gameplay. It was unfortunate for the Super Nintendo port of Final Fight to not have two-player mode, due to Capcom not being able to optimize the hardware for that element at the time. This alone gave Streets of Rage the advantage. There are 8 stages to complete in this game. Excluding the 7th stage, every stage has a boss at the end. When you play 2 players, you will fight 2 bosses instead. At the end of the 8th stage, you will encounter the crime boss himself, Mr. X. Here is where things get interesting. Mr. X will offer you to join his syndicate as his right-hand man. You can either choose to reject or accept it. If you reject his offer, you will fight him as the final boss. Defeating Mr. X will earn you the good ending of the game. However, if you accept his offer, Mr. X trolls you and sends you back to the 6th stage. You can make your way back to Mr. X and fight him, thus leading you to the good ending as well. There is a secret bad ending that you can unlock in this game. To unlock it, you need to have a second player. When Mr. X asks you to join his syndicate, one player must accept and the other must reject. Both players will fight each other and the winner will once again be asked by Mr. X. The winning player must reject the second offer, then defeat Mr. X. This will trigger the bad ending as the winning player is now the crime boss. Despite being limited with the combat mechanics, I do greatly appreciate the creativity from the development team. This does create somewhat a replay value for Streets of Rage. I don't recall any beat-em-up games at the time with different endings. The limited and slow-paced combat made this game one of the hardest beat-em-up games to play. To be fair, I do believe this was how the developers intended the game to play as, considering they wanted a more strategic gameplay. The gameplay would eventually improve as the series progressed. Music is definitely a major highlight in this game. Koshiro Yuzo really made a name for himself with the amazing tracks for Streets of Rage. Instead of me talking, I let Koshiro's music do all the talking. Streets of Rage is one of the most influential games ever made. It is also one of the most well-known and well-respected beat-em-up games of all time. Despite not being the first of its kind, Streets of Rage created a legacy as it laid the foundation for not only the series itself, but modern beat-em-up games as well. The game was a critical and commercial success. The game became one of the best-selling Sega games in 1992 as it sold around 2.6 million copies worldwide. The game earned an estimated gross revenue of $130 million in 1992. Following the success of Streets of Rage, Sega would capitalize by releasing a sequel the following year. According to Oba Noriyoshi, he didn't expect the game to have a sequel, but always hoped that Streets of Rage would eventually become a series. We will discuss the sequel in another video eventually. So that's it for this video, ladies and gentlemen, a deep retrospective of the first Streets of Rage game. What are your thoughts of Streets of Rage? Have you ever played this game before? Let me know in the comment section below. With that being said, this is me, Profar. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you dislike this video, give me a thumbs down. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, join the Profar Mokori Hunter X Discord server. I'll see you guys in the next video.